Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. Politico: Trump asks federal court to intervene in hush money case in bid to toss conviction. MSNBC News: Trump seeks to move New York hush money case to federal court before sentencing. Ladies and gentlemen, the Supreme Court victory on immunity, on presidential immunity, has essentially overturned the hush money conviction. Number one, and hit subscribe to this channel. A state cannot indict or convict. A state cannot convict Trump of a federal crime when the FEC itself at the Department of Justice have dropped the hush money case. There was no federal indictment. We don't even know the federal statute that New York unilaterally decided to indict and convict Trump on. We don't know the actual specific statute within the FEC laws, or the Campaign Act that they cited. The FEC dropped the hush money case. Okay, you're going to hear that in a second. Hit subscribe to this channel, ladies and gentlemen. This is exactly why the Supreme Court, with the immunity victory, because speaking to a lawyer, for example, as president, you're immune from prosecution. He did not commit a crime on a federal level. Number one. Number two, it wasn't for the state of New York to decide what a federal crime is. It was for the Department of Justice. And the state does not have jurisdiction, so it's completely unconstitutional. Number three, a lot of the evidence used in the court case against Trump in New York, he was already president, and the immunity victory shields Trump and any other president from a political party trying to imprison that person. Anyway, hit subscribe. I'm doing 2 live streams a day, people, and I will continue to do 2. I might ramp it up to 3 live streams at the end of September. Hit subscribe. Let's get going.
Says he will not appear on Capitol Hill today as House Republicans hold a hearing on former President Trump's New York trial. Bragg citing scheduling conflicts. He is set to testify, though, on July 12th, just one day after Trump's sentencing. Federal Election Commissioner Trey Traynor and Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey.
Andrew Bailey is awesome. Trey Traynor is fantastic. He's a former Federal Election Commission chairman. Hans A. von Spakovsky, Bradley Smith, these are all FEC chairmen. They all stated Trump could have paid Stormy with dollar bills. It wouldn't have mattered. Trump could have taken dollar bills out, paid Stormy 100 whatever grand. It would not have mattered. It would not have been a campaign finance issue. Okay? Because as Bradley Smith, you'll hear in a second, explained in the next clip, it was an expenditure that would have taken place with or without a campaign. That's how you know it didn't break any laws. Furthermore, the Steele dossier purchase warranted a campaign finance fine. The FEC actually fined the Clinton campaign and the DNC. They didn't fine Trump.
Set to testify today at today's hearing, and they join me now. Trey, you notice I emphasized the election in your title. I guess we're finally set to hear from somebody who actually understands how election law works. Juan Merchan cannot silence you. What are the top points, Trey, you're going to try and drive home today?
Well, the most important point is that Judge Merchan completely obliterated what's been longstanding federal election law with the jury charge that he gave, asking the jury whether Donald Trump had willfully contributed to a campaign. And the legal standard has long been knowing and willful standard, so he's completely upended that standard. And it's one of those things where the Department of Justice should have intervened early in this case and protected the jurisdiction of the federal government to enforce federal campaign finance law. They didn't. They didn't protect the jurisdiction of the Federal Election Commission, and it's completely perplexing why.
What do I focus on every single day? The stock market collapse, and unfortunately there's going to be a collapse, and the Supreme Court victories, immunity, overturning the Colorado ban, reducing the sentencing of the January defendants, ensuring proper documentation in Arizona. The Supreme Court and the economy are the two things you have to worry about. Forget polls. Polls are completely, they're public relations at this point. We already know Trump is up. He's been up for months and months and months over Biden. Harris was polling worse than Biden, so how she can even be above Trump is it's very difficult to actually believe any of these polls that say Harris is up 5, 6, 7, 8. She was polling worse than Biden. But anyway, the jurisdiction is the issue, ladies and gentlemen. I'm like this. If you're going to watch 2 to 3 live streams a day, I'm going to focus on very dry, some might say boring topics. They are the only 2 things you need to concern yourself with: the Supreme Court and the stock market. That's it before November 5th. Now, of course, foreign policy, inflation, these are far more, important issues when it comes to daily life. I'm talking about electoral politics. In terms of electoral politics, Supreme Court and stock market, they will both cement Trump's victory, okay? And we can get out of this terrible economy and atrocious foreign policy.
They didn't do that. There's long-standing Supreme Court precedent that says that they should have.
And it's just how law works. People always fight over jurisdiction. They never give that up. And in this case...
By the way, T-Duck, thank you so much to my super chat. Thank you, everybody. T-Duck, thank you so very, very, very much. Unfortunately, everybody, we're going to have a devastating stock market collapse, bubble bursting. I don't want anyone to lose money. Left, right, center, Democrat, Republican. I'm voting Trump, but if you're voting Biden, I don't want you to lose money. Unfortunately, Biden and Harris, their policies have led to a terrible market collapse. It'll probably almost certainly take place before November, but it'll take place sometime before 2025, I believe.
It was seeded so easily. Andrew, Democrats, of course, are going to try and flip the script, calling today's hearing playing politics. And they're going to make this point, Andrew, A.G. Bailey. They merely follow the facts and the law up there in New York City. How will you cut the legs out from under that argument?
Well, they bent the law to meet the facts in a specious legal charge. There's an unseemly amount of prosecutorial misconduct. And at the end of the day, what that does is it injects both statutory and constitutional violations into the process from the charging document onto the jury deliberations. And so this is a legally errant conviction. It's not a legally valid conviction. And that emphasizes the illicit nature of the witch hunt prosecution. And it's important that the American people understand that the goal here was never to convict President Trump of a crime. It was always to remove him from the campaign trail. Now, this is a presidential candidate that has a right to speak and that we as a people have a right to access. This has done immeasurable damage to our democratic republic, and we've got to hold wrongdoers accountable.
Let's focus on this Matthew Colangelo, Alvin Bragg dichotomy here at A.G. Bailey, because the number 3 starter right now in the Yankees rotation is not waving his hand and saying, please send me to single A so I can ply my craft. What possible
to go work in state court? He's politically motivated. Those prosecutors should have been disqualified from prosecuting that case. There was no case to begin with. A subsequent prosecutor that the court could have appointed would have identified that and dismissed it before it got this far. And again, Biden is behind this whole thing. I mean, he has managed the Department of Justice that also administers grants on behalf of the Soros-backed Vera Institute to Alvin Bragg's office with the intent of dismantling the criminal justice system. So while Alvin Bragg is ignoring crime in the subways and on the city streets, he is being trained to weaponize the criminal justice system against Biden's political opponents.
Trey, quick final word to you. If we don't stop this lawfare right now in its tracks, can our century-old justice system survive?
No, it can't. And we have a big threat to the First Amendment and whether or not candidates can actually run for office in any state, because we'll have turned loose all the prosecutors across the country, whether they be state or local prosecutors, to go after individual candidates for perceived violations of campaign finance law.
This was a perceived violation. It wasn't a violation that the federal government stated took place. Trey Traynor is 100% right. The Supreme Court, ladies and gentlemen, and also the stock market. We'll get to the stock market in a second.
Right, so Trump's indictment looks like a perversion of campaign finance laws. There are no crimes committed, or at least that's what Bradley Smith, Capital University law professor, chairman, and founder of the Institute for Free Speech. Mr. Smith is a former FEC commissioner, and he's the co-author of Voting Rights and Election Law. Brad, you're writing in the Wall Street Journal. We've been trying to get our paws on you for the show. Thank you for coming on. You're saying there was no crime.
My pleasure.
There was no crime to start with.
There was no federal crime. Yet this is the thing with Trump. There was no federal crime. But they convicted him on a federal crime that doesn't exist. The federal government literally was not a part of this. How can you convict Trump on a federal campaign law felony when the federal government dropped the case, did not indict Trump? The state has no jurisdiction. It's unconstitutional. It's blatantly unconstitutional.
Even if there were some issues on the so-called filing of business papers, there was still no crime.
Right. I've had a bit more time. I had the commercial break to look at the indictment a bit more. And it looks like the last couple pages of the indictment do intend to say that the crime was not disclosing campaign contributions, although they never cite a specific government statute. But here's the problem here. The prosecutor's theory goes like this. Federal law says it's a campaign contribution to make an expenditure for the purpose of influencing a federal election. Those are the key words, for the purpose of influencing. And he says, well, these payments were intended to keep her quiet, which would help the campaign, so they were for the purpose of influencing the campaign. Now, first, these payments could have been made for other reasons, right? To prevent embarrassment to his family, to preserve marital harmony, all kinds of things. But none of that really matters because the standard here for the purpose of influencing is not a subjective standard. It's an objective one. So if I go out and I want to pay for TV ads that say, you know, Donald Trump is a ding-dong daddy from Dumas Bay because I think that's really going to help him win re-election, it doesn't matter. Legally, that will not be for the purpose of influencing an election, no matter what my own subjective purpose was, right? It's subjective. So what counts as campaign expenditures? Things like you don't hire a campaign manager unless you're running for office. Right. You don't take out ads saying vote for me unless you're running for office. You don't hire or establish field offices unless you're running for office. But other things you do. For example, you buy clothes whether you're running for office or not. So the fact that I'm running for office and I say, I've got to look good, and I go out and I buy a $6,000 suit that I would never otherwise buy, doesn't make it a campaign expenditure. It doesn't count. Same if I say I need a $600 haircut. Or to take a more perhaps relevant example, suppose I'm a business owner and I say I'm going to run for office and I go to my corporate lawyer and I say, there's some lawsuits against our corporation. I think they're bogus, but let's get rid of them so they don't interfere with my run. Just settle those lawsuits. You can't settle those with campaign funds. It's not a campaign expense, even though that person's subjective purpose was to influence the campaign.
By the way,
so that's a very important part of the law.
I know. I was very impressed with the $6,000 suit. That must have been a custom, bespoke suit. In your op-ed piece, it was $4,000. But I know we've had an inflation problem in the last couple of weeks. But your point here, I'm just having some fun. But your point here, Brad, if I understand it, is that you buy a suit, you get a nice haircut, whatever. You're doing it.
You would buy a suit with or without a campaign. You would pay Stormy with or without a campaign. You'd get a haircut with or without a campaign. That's why it's not a campaign finance issue. Those aren't my words. That's the former FEC chairman. The people who did commit FEC crimes were the Democrats for purchasing the Steele dossier. That's why they were fined.
It directly for the campaign. Is that correct? That's the point you're making. But if you want to
well, the point is, yeah.
If you want to,
they've essentially overturned the sentence with the immunity victory. In addition to the fact that sentencing for Trump, when it happens, the Supreme Court will get involved, overturn it completely, but that they've essentially already ruled that he's, with the immunity victory, there's no way they can prosecute him for speaking to a lawyer, for example, which is what he did with Michael Cohen, which is the foundation of their unconstitutional conviction. In addition to the fact that there's the jurisdiction issue, the state cannot level a federal crime without the federal government involved. It's essentially already a done deal. We're just waiting for sentencing.
Defend yourself, your honor, keep it away from your wife, that kind of thing. which, by the way, is unproven. I mean, Stormy Daniels keeps telling people she didn't have an affair. Nobody wants to listen to her, but that's perhaps grist for another segment. But if that does not qualify because it's not directly for the campaign. Is that right? Is that my correct interpretation?
It actually goes further than that. Even though you bought that suit because you were running for office and want it to look good, it's still not a campaign expenditure.
Oh.
Why? Because you buy clothes. You buy clothes whether you're running for office or not, right? And so anything that people might do, even if they're not running for office, doesn't count. So people pay money. For example, they pay divorce attorneys to try to seal up their divorce records so that those don't become an embarrassment of the campaign.
Right.
Their purpose may be to influence the campaign, but it's an expenditure that somebody who wasn't running for office might also make. The only things that count are things that come directly out of the fact that you're campaigning. And the flip side of this is that it's actually illegal to convert your campaign funds then to personal use. So it's actually illegal to use your campaign funds to buy that suit. It's illegal to use your campaign funds to pay a lawyer to seal your divorce records because you think that will help your campaign. And this is the real problem you have here. Not only is there, I think, not a campaign finance violation, this underlying alleged violation, but it's a situation where they're going to get Trump coming or going, because I think, knowing Bragg, and you've set the political stage very well, had Trump paid for this with campaign funds, I think we can feel pretty certain that he would be being charged today with having illegally converted his campaign funds to personal use. In other words, they were going to get him coming or going. If he pays for it with campaign funds, they were going to say it was illegal personal use. If he doesn't pay this money with campaign funds, which was the reality, now they say, oh, well, he should have used campaign funds. And that's, the antithesis of the rule of law, where you set up a system where no matter what course of action a person takes, they're going to be held in violation of the law.
Well, I mean, but
So it wasn't a campaign issue. All right. They convicted him in a state court specifically so it would be difficult for a federal court or the Supreme Court to overturn the conviction. But they will, because it's at least five of the 9 justices aren't just going to allow the Democrats to imprison a candidate. Okay, there goes our democracy that Democrats care so much about. So, especially if it's unconstitutional to begin with.
how does that get up to the Federal Election Commission, which has already turned this case down once?
Right. Well, this raises yet another question. Can, of course, a state prosecutor prosecute an alleged, quote, federal crime that the Federal Election Commission and the Department of Justice have already decided not to prosecute? We might think about it this way. Imagine if New York just passed a law saying it is a violation of the New York Penal Code to violate any federal law. And then we'll decide what federal law is violated, right? That would subvert the entire federal state structure of law. I mean, that would allow
the federal state structure of law. The Department of Justice indicts for federal crimes. The state can indict for state crimes. You can be, like if you're a part of a criminal organization, indicted on state and federal charges. But the federal charges have to come from the federal government, not a court in New York.
State DAs to start prosecuting anything they think is a violation of federal law, even though the federal courts or federal administrative agencies or the Department of Justice had thought it was not a violation of federal law. So it's really getting into sort of wacky legal theories, but also I think very dangerous theories. Again, if we think about the rule of law, I don't think this can be emphasized enough that if Trump had paid for these with campaign funds, which the DA says he had to have done, I think they'd probably be chasing him today for illegal conversion of campaign funds to pay this personal expense.
We don't know that Trump paid anything to anybody. As a matter of fact, I'm just saying there's a lot of speculation. We don't know this. I mean,
we don't know that at all, actually. They haven't proved that at all. They never proved that, by the way, at all. Let's get to the price controls. Okay, so I spoke about this earlier today. They can't even have a functioning, they don't even have a functioning primary, but they're going to decide the price of ground beef, mayonnaise, gasoline. They don't even have a functioning primary. So they can't do what they did to Biden and to Bernie Sanders with the economy. Okay, they can control the farce of a primary that they have, but they can't control prices. Actually, no economist can. It's never happened before. The Soviet Union collapsed because of central planning.
They're not really happy with Kamala Harris's price-fixing plan. They say it'll just make problems worse. Bar rescue guy John Taffer joins me now. John, welcome back. We've heard from various industries, and they all told us, look, price controls don't work. All right, what about the restaurant business? You're in it. What happens?
Oh, Stuart, it's a nightmare. Good to be back, by the way. Think of a hamburger, Stuart. First of all, there's thousands of different hamburgers a restaurant can buy. There's prime, there's choice, there's different shapes, different sizes, there's filet mignon, there's prime rib, every blend, every type you can think about. So she has to send an analyst in to price every type of hamburger. Then the rancher's costs can't go up, Stuart. His price for feed, electronics, must remain the same so he can sell it to the processing plant. Then the processing plant's costs can't go up. They have to stay exactly the same. Fuel, equipment, transportation, labor. Then when it goes to the distributor, his costs can't go up. Fuel, distribution, union, all the other costs associated with his business. Then the restaurant gets the hamburger in a price-controlled way. Now I have a question, Stuart. What about the bun? What about the tomato? What about the lettuce? What about the ketchup? What happens then? I mean, it becomes absurd. You cannot accomplish this. And when we look at past countries that have done it, Stuart, shortages happen. If the bun guy can't make money, he stops making buns. So the supply side impact is massive. It's an absurd premise. The fact that it's being presented as a policy is as absurd as the premise itself.
Okay, next case. Harris wants to raise the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. What would that do to your business?
Well, Stuart, that's taking 7% of the profits that we make out of our pockets. Those dollars are used for upgrades, for remodeling, for employee raises, for systems, for marketing, research and development.
So 7% of the profits, you think that they're maybe going to downsize corporations? You think people will lose their jobs because of tax increases? Probably.
All of these things. A communist country, China, is 3% lower than us. So two things, Stuart. From the business standpoint, of course, it's a disaster. We're going to see reductions in payroll, reductions in other ways, price increases, things to offset that impact. From an American standpoint, how do we compete in a global marketplace when our companies are paying a higher tax rate than our largest competitor that is a communist government, and they're 3 points lower? Stuart, it destroys the business on a local basis, and it weakens America's economy on a global basis. These are policies that make no sense. Stuart, when you start to put these things together, words like catastrophe appear. And that's the most horrifying of all. These decisions can't be made on an isolated basis. They have to be made on a collective basis that puts us on a plan to move forward.
So you're literally going to vote for an economic collapse if you vote Democrat. That's not hyperbolic. That's not look at interest rates and look at inflation. Okay, interest rates are high. That's why inflation is somewhat at bay, but it's really not. If you have to have such high interest rates to push inflation down, that tells you how shaky the economy is. Then they flooded the country full of strategic petroleum reserves. So it's like the same Democrats who talk about the environment had no problem releasing strategic petroleum reserves into the country.
You know, if they were price gouging, wouldn't the profit margin be 30% instead of 1.2%? I mean, this whole thing is absurd. The Washington Post directly cited communism about this in its story, saying it's hard to exaggerate how bad this is, that it's going to lead to shortages, black markets, and hoarding. Let's bring in for his reaction former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Kevin Hassett. Kevin, always wonderful to see you, sir. When you saw this plan, what was your reaction?
Honestly, I was horrified. This is incredibly chilling. You know, a lot of the sort of reasonable Democratic economists, like my good friend Jason Furman, are out there saying, well, they're not really going to do it. But if you look at Kamala Harris's record, you know, she's for Medicare for all, doing so you can't have your health insurance. She wants everybody to have a guaranteed job. She's got all these socialist policies that she's been walking back over the last couple of weeks. And now they come out, now you know why they don't let her speak in public. She comes out with the craziest, silliest, and most economically illiterate proposal in the history of presidential politics. And honestly, she wants the government to set prices, and she really wants them to. That's the chilling thing. If she becomes president, this is going to be policy. You're going to go to the grocery store, and it won't be there, or if it is there, the shelves will be empty. That's what happens when the government sets prices. I actually wrote a chapter in the economic report of the president, or my staff did, when I was in the White House, that showed that when the government starts setting food prices, then that's when people start having famines and stuff, because the people who produce food can't afford to do so because the government pays them less than the cost. It's just terrible.
I mean, it's being called remarkably, absurdly idiotic, breathtakingly idiotic. And it took her 4 years to come up with this. I mean, this is after her running.
But don't you understand? We have to have price controls and unrealized taxes on unrealized gains because Trump is mean, don't you know?
Tim Walz called socialism, quote, neighborliness. She's copying Senator Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. Kevin, the irony today is grocery giant Kroger just promised to cut prices by $1 billion after its merger with Albertsons. Let me back up. Let's watch Catherine Rampell of the Washington Post on this and listen to former President Trump. Watch this.
What that would mean, which basically says, like, it's not going to be markets, it's not going to be supply and demand that's determining how much your grocery store charges you for milk or for eggs. It's going to be some bureaucrat in D.C., which seems like totally unworkable, first of all, for the FTC to be deciding like how much Kroger charges for eggs in Michigan. But it also would be very bad for markets. We've seen this kind of thing tried in lots of other countries before: Venezuela, Argentina, the Soviet Union, etc. It leads to shortages. It leads to black markets. Plenty of uncertainty.
Now Kamala is reportedly proposing communist price controls. She wants price controls. And if they worked, I'd go along with it too, but they don't work. They actually have the exact opposite impact and effect. But it leads to food shortages, rationing, hunger, dramatically more inflation. Their Inflation Reduction Act, by the way, was a disaster. It's what caused the inflation. Their Inflation Reduction Act was a con job. They actually admitted that it wasn't really for inflation that they did it.
Yeah, it was for climate change. Price fixing is already illegal. Kevin, what's next? Price controls on car insurance, baby food, pet.
You better believe there won't be price controls on iPhones. So the Democrats say, oh, we can control the price of eggs and mayonnaise and gasoline, but you better not. They will never touch a product from Apple, for example.
Food.
Oh, sure.
I mean, all are up double digits under Biden and Harris.
Right. Well, the fact is that Harris's proposal is modeled after a proposal by Elizabeth Warren that's so open-ended that the government could basically set the price for everything. And so if you think that this is just, something that's going to take the far left people and make sure that they're ready to vote for her.
Kamala Harris needs to simply give a price of what everything should be. Well, bread, eggs, and tell all the companies and all of the retail and all the grocery chains, this is what our economic plan will be. You will no longer sell ground beef at this price. You will sell it at the Democratic Party's determined price for the good of the country, inflation reduction price, as long as Trump is not president because he's a menace to democracy and mean price. So they should simply say, and all of the left-leaning pundits that make, $800 million, $2 million a year, pushing policies that didn't work in the Soviet Union, they should explain, well, what is a good price for eggs, bread, bottled water, milk, ground beef, steak, chicken, fish, mayonnaise, electricity. I mean, are they going to price controls for heating, gas, oil, gasoline, diesel, price controls for diesel fuel? Let's see if that works.
No, this is a serious proposal. In fact, while she's out there talking about this price gouging, she's also bragging about the price setting that the government has done in the prescription drug space. And my colleague Thomas Phillipson wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago that showed that because of the price fixing of the Biden-Harris administration, then millions of seniors are going to lose their drug benefits. You could go through that article and see about how that works. But she's bragging about having fixed other prices, and she's copying a bill that wants to fix every price.
Well, she wasn't picked by Democrat primary voters, so this is what the party is stuck with: absolute abject stupidity. Kevin.
They don't have a primary. They don't even have a functioning primary. They don't have a primary. It's not a primary. It's just who knows what it is.
Well, the Harris campaign sells good vibes and taco recipes because Lord knows they can't sell this dog of an economy. And although celebs may be on Zoom singing her praises, Kamala Harris and young voters, well, can they use good vibes to pay their rent or buy their food or get ahead?
I'm 20 years old. Why is a one-bedroom apartment $600, $1,600? Rent prices is outrageous. And then these jobs, they're bare minimum jobs. I really waited my whole life to grow up and do this.
My parents are Gen X's, and they've never owned a house at all. And there were many times where we were homeless.
I kept a full-time job the whole time I was homeless. It's just that everything is so expensive nowadays that what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize eating over having a home?
We have to make 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and that's not fun money. That's money so that we're not homeless.
This is heartbreaking to hear.
So 4 years ago, Democrats pushed to shut down economic activity throughout the country. This was a self-induced calamity. It was a choice. It was 100% a choice. No one was forced to do anything. A consensus of intelligent people is not the excuse for a terrible, foolish policy. When governors, blue state governors, Democratic Party governors gleefully shut down economic activity, barely opened up a year and a half later. Okay, they'd still be shut. Some cities would still be shut down now if you left it up to Democrats. Okay. That might be hyperbole, but that ruined the economy for a great many people. That caused inflation. That was the precursor. That was the foundation of all the problems we have. Trillions were pumped into the economy in terms of fiscal and monetary stimulus. We're running out of that stimulus now. That's one of the reasons this economic collapse, unfortunately, is going to take place. But that was under Trump, but you can't blame Trump because it wasn't his policy. He can't control what governors do. Okay, and they say, well, Trump's response to you-know-what, that was a state and local issue. The federal government had no ability to really make that great of an impact. We know that because more people lost their lives in Biden's first year from you-know-what. So they shut down economic activity. This was a fact. Democrats pushed for this because bureaucrats and experts told them to do so. One person in particular, I don't understand why the country is not all completely shut down. Shut it down. And so, who shall remain nameless, then they say, oh, well, we had to. You know, it was the you-know-what that made us do it. No, it wasn't. It was a choice. Then Biden comes in, immediately goes after U.S. oil and gas oil and gas companies. Immediately makes it difficult for them to drill. Immediately. Then the price of diesel, then the price of fuel, then the price of gasoline goes up. What happens? When diesel fuel goes up, there's a direct correlation between diesel fuel and the price of groceries, for example. Everything went up. We had 9% inflation in 2022. And then Democrats said, and the Fed and the Treasury said, well, inflation is temporary. Then they passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Didn't do anything other than add more inflation. The interest rates went up. So when people say, well, why is rent so high? Because there was an eviction moratorium. Because people were not allowed to work. Democrats, as always, wanted to be seen as the good, moral, good people on the side of justice and history. And yet they pushed for this calamity. They prevented people from working, causing AOC and others to say, eviction moratorium, man. And then guess what happens when you have an eviction moratorium? The cost of owning apartments goes up because people aren't paying. Because they can't, because they've been prevented from working. Everything goes up in price. And then you have a young generation of Americans that are very much influenced by media, or I should say half of the electorate. Oh, Trump is mean, he's bad for democracy. He's literally giving you a great economy. Why couldn't you have just simply voted your pocketbook? You wouldn't have the country wouldn't be in the economic mess it is in right now if we had voted for Trump. But of course, it's about political power. Democrats did not want to give up political power. Okay? That's it. It's about there are wonderful, morally superior, highly educated liberal Democrats who have no problem with a recession or stock market collapse as long as Trump is not in office. They don't care. They don't care about endless wars. They don't care. They don't want Trump in office because 49 of the greatest of the 50 top historians have stated that Trump is a menace to democracy. So there you go. If 9 out of 10 dentists hate Trump, if 49 of the top 50 historians don't like Trump, well, so what if your barbecue costs $700 for 10 people? Who cares? It's about democracy. Before it was about the economy, stupid. Now it's about democracy. Democracy, as with all words, has turned into a euphemism for whatever is good for the Democratic Party.
Here, the question is, do these young people really think a President Harris will revive their prospects with policies like price controls? Joining me now, Dave Ramsey, personal finance expert, host of the fabulous The Ramsey Show. Dave, great to see you tonight. Okay, price controls. Talk to young people for a moment. Is that going to fix this problem, dig them out of that financial hole?
No, because it's artificial. It's not sustainable because it's artificial. If you just put a lid on something, and if you want to explore what really happens, just go back to the 1970s. We tried it. There was a whole movement for price controls across everything because inflation was out of control and rampant, just like it is now. And so it's been tried. It does not work. What works is to flood the market with supply. Lots of oil means lower oil prices. Lots of labor means lower labor prices. Lots of whatever.
Democrats say, oh, we should go electric. Then they beg countries around the world for oil. So what's the difference? They don't believe what they say anyway.
means lower prices. It's a simple supply-demand curve. It's called economics, and it's called the free market economics. When you insert government in it and try to artificially cramp it down, it simply does not work, because you can only hold that hose for so long until the pressure builds up and then it blows on you.
Well, President Trump was talking today about how we have flooded the market with low-wage workers, but unfortunately they're illegal aliens or asylum seekers, migrants, and so that has artificially kind of jacked up some of these employment numbers. But the Washington Post makes an important point regarding the retail sales numbers that came out today, Dave, which showed a 1% increase, which a lot of people think that's good, it's increasing. But the top 20% of households account for roughly 45% of overall spending, and low and middle income households are really feeling the brunt of high inflation. The lion's share of U.S. consumer spending coming from the wealthiest consumers. Dave, given what you hear on a daily basis, does that surprise you at all?
Well, let's also understand the statistic there. It went up 1%. It wasn't 1% in number of units sold. It was in dollar volume. What's that mean? It means the price went up. It doesn't mean the economy's booming. It just means the cost of the good went up by 1%. Actually, it went up a lot more than 1% because the number of units is down. And so that's a misnomer. That's misreported. It acts like the economy is booming in retail or something. And yes, we are seeing this disparity between the haves and the have-nots getting wider and wider and wider, which traditionally you'd see as you see more and more government intervention in the economy. When you let the free market run and you leave it alone, this is a battle of ideas. When you let the free market run and leave it alone, it will find equilibrium, and it works to the advantage of most everyone when you do that. When you insert government in it and you say, I'm going to do price controls, I'm going to protect you from high grocery prices, it's simply not sustainable, and it causes more problems than not. All we got to do is go back and look at the mess of the supply chain in COVID and see that exact same thing unfolding there. And so if you want to help the little man, let CBS, the market run.
Yeah. Well, some of the dumb ideas they have out there is just take cold showers, Dave. Skip a meal and take cold showers. That's the answer.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back tomorrow at around, I would say, 3 p.m. Eastern. Be here tomorrow, people. I'll do 2 live streams a day. Probably ramp it up to 3 a day. Make them a little shorter, but 3 a day, probably the end of October, September, definitely the end of October also.